Good morning, everybody. A couple of years ago, I did a video to see whether the extra step of soaking and pre-sprouting peas versus just direct sowing them into the garden was worth the effort. My results seemed to indicate that it gave you a bit of a jump start on growth, but I made a few errors in my testing process. The main one being that rather than direct sowing the peas on the same day that I started soaking the other batch of peas, I actually started the soaking process about 5 days prior to the other group being direct sown. In essence, giving the direct sown group a head start. So this year, I decided to replicate that test, correcting my timing errors, as well as adding another variable into the mix. I did a group of direct sown, a group of soaked and pre-sprouted, as well as a group of peas that I started indoors. And all groups were started on March 9th. And today, I'll be sharing the results of all of these plantings. For my test, I decided to go with a variety called Pealicious. Goofy name, great variety, because I've had wonderful results with this one in the garden in the past. So this first group, as I mentioned, was direct sown into the garden on March 9th. The second group was soaked and sprouted. So starting the same day, I took my pea seed, placed it in a small jar of water, and allowed those seeds to soak overnight. The next day, I strained off the water and placed those seeds on a couple of layers of damp paper towel. Folding the towel over on top of the peas and placing them inside of an open Ziploc bag. Now I just let these set on the kitchen counter. No need for putting in the refrigerator, no need for extra warmth, and no need for any extra sunlight at this stage. Each day I checked my paper towels. If they were starting to dry out, I would just spritz them with a little extra water. And by March 14th, so 5 days later, these peas were sprouted and ready to plant outdoors. Now I found with sprouting peas that the sooner you can get them out after they sprout, the better. The third group was planted in seed starting medium in large cell trays indoors. I kept them inside the relatively warm house under grow lights until they had put on about 2 inches of growth. At that point, I moved them out to the cooler greenhouse. They were ready for transplanting, but not until April 7th, so it took them quite a while to get going. One thing that I've noticed with doing peas as transplants is you're better off erring on the smaller side. So I definitely don't like to let them get too tall. Basically, I want to get them transplanted out before the little tendrils start trying to intertwine with each other. They seem to fare better and suffer less from transplant shock at this smaller stage. Due to a very cold, wet spring, everybody was off to a very slow start. It wasn't until March 31st that both groups, the direct sown and the soaked and sprouted, were up and out of the ground, with the soaked and sprouted peas having a smidge of a head start on growth. By the time I transplanted my starts out on April 7th, the two other groups were still very small, still an inch or less in size. To make matters worse, then we got hit with several rounds of snow, as well as temperatures dipping into the teens. The transplants got the worst of it, but peas will tolerate cold. You'll see some cold damage on the foliage, but typically they'll grow out of it, as my peas all did. All through the growing process, the transplants seemed to have the advantage. They came into bloom first, May 17th versus the soaked and sprouted starting on May 20th and the direct sown batch on May 26th. In fact, by the time the direct sown group was in full flower, the transplants had already had a good start on setting pods. Now, the thing that I'm sure you are all most curious about, well, when did we actually get to pick and eat the peas? The transplants were ready to pick on June 3rd. So I was able to pick a few earlier than that, but I'm going off of when the biggest bulk of pea pods were mature. So June 3rd for the transplant group, the soaked and sprouted batch, right around June 6th, and I'm getting ready to pick my direct sown group today, which is June 10th. So we're really only talking about a week's difference in maturity between the earliest batch, which was my transplants, and my latest batch, which were these direct sown peas. But I'm always facing a conundrum here in Ohio, and that is that peas do better when planted as early in the spring as possible. They hate the heat, and I'm kind of in a race against time every spring because sometimes our Junes are very warm, even May can be very, very warm, and it doesn't make peas super happy. So the earlier I can plant them out, the better. But peas don't like to germinate in very, very cold, wet soil, which, as you can imagine, my clay soil here always is in early spring. So for me, giving my pea seed a little bit of a jump on growth, so using either the soaked and sprouted method or the transplant method, is probably a better bet for most springs. Now, if you have a preferred method of planting peas, be sure to drop a line in the comments below and let me know. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.